Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering fake news in a panic. Trump cuts funding for all propaganda media worldwide. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. President Trump has frozen $268 million in USAID foreign media funding, placing a 90-day hold on all foreign aid. The freeze impacts over 6,200 journalists and 700 news outlets in more than 30 countries, causing widespread panic in global media. And some of these outlets that the USAID group was donating money to actually donate the money to other international media outlets, so who knows where it's even going. The BBC, for example, has its own international media charity fund, and we've been funding that as well. So this is a major disruption for these guys. Media people from Belarus and Ukraine report that their operations are at risk of shutting down due to the sudden loss of funding. USAID previously funded projects promoting diversity, LGBT activism, and environmental initiatives in countries like Serbia, Vietnam, and Guatemala. Democrats and media organizations claim the freeze undermines democracy and transparency worldwide. Critics argue USAID was the tool for pushing political narratives abroad, funded by American taxpayers without proper oversight. And look, we're not babies over here. We understand that propaganda is information war, and all of that is understood. But if you're going to actually do that, you need the authority of the current administration to decide what the American people want to do with their information warfare. This is not something for politicos in Washington to decide, oh, we want to push this LGBT agenda, we want to push that woke agenda, we want to push climate change. All of that's fine, but you need to get the approval from the administration. You can't go off on your own political information wars and not involve the American people by consulting the new administration. And they had plenty of time to do this if they wanted to during the transition. But they didn't do that, so now they've lost the money and their agenda is in shambles. Glenn Greenwald calls USAID a well-documented front for the CIA, designed to manipulate foreign politics for U.S. elites. J. Michael Waller claims USAID operates as an unaccountable covert operations agency running missions without legal authorization. Elon Musk accuses USAID of paying media outlets to publish propaganda aligned with U.S. political interests. And if you want to do something like that, if you want to pay for propaganda, that is a normal thing to do in the course of information wars. And maybe it's better to have an information war than to have an actual war. At the same time, you need to have approval from the current administration so that the American people are represented in these decisions, at least in some way. The freeze is reigniting debates over foreign aid, media influence, and the role of government in funding international journalism. And also, this just came out today from Variety. Donald Trump calls for 60 Minutes to be terminated amid lawsuit over Kamala Harris interview, claims CBS should lose its license because CBS was forced to produce the entire Kamala Harris interview that did affect the election. And it's been found that, yes, it was heavily edited. They didn't portray the interview as heavily edited. So that's propaganda being done here domestically. And that outlet also did criticize Trump for not engaging in that 60 Minutes interview, further interfering with his election. From Breitbart, Trump freezes millions in USAID funds for foreign media, triggering globalist outrage. American taxpayers are no longer subsidizing foreign media, once funded by the U.S. State Agency for International Development, that's USAID. And that's prompting major left-wing concern over the potential impact on global journalism and what they call democracy. President Donald Trump put a 90-day hold on all USAID's foreign aid this week, which subsequently cut $268 million from media outlets in more than 30 countries, according to the agency's 2025 foreign aid budget reported by Reporters Without Borders. USAID's 2023 fact sheet, taken offline due to the hold, boasted the agency supported 6,200 journalists, 707 news outlets, 279 media sector civil society organizations, according to the Columbia Journalism Review. Quote, we have articles scheduled until the end of January, but after that, if we haven't found solutions, we won't be able to publish anywhere, according to a journalist from a Belarusian reporter who told this to Reporters Without Borders. Anna Babinets, CEO of a media outlet based in Kyiv, echoed the Belarusian. Quote, at our company, 80% of our budget is affected, she said. 80%? I mean, we're literally paying for almost all of it, apparently? That's the way it used to be. But we're not doing that anymore. As the savings enraged foreign media, it caused great concern among Democrats who claim USAID's work is imperative. The agency's work includes many radical left agenda items, such as $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities, $2.5 million for electric vehicles for Vietnam, $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala, and $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. Some of these programs, of course, they're just kind of taking the money and probably not literally doing anything, or they're doing a little bit of work, but they're keeping a lot of the money. Maybe they keep the money in a lot of these cases and don't do anything, but even if they put all the money into these projects, they're not really worthwhile projects. I certainly don't think they are. And at least if the government doesn't feel they are, if they're not getting approved by the new administration, why would we agree to spend this kind of money on these kinds of projects? It makes zero sense. But a lot of what they're doing, too, is they're not just pushing their agenda, they're also undermining the existing governments. They don't like nationalist governments. They like globalist-type governments, citizen of the world rather than citizen of your country. So when they say they're putting money into pushing electric cars, they may not actually be putting money into pushing electric cars in Vietnam, if you know what I mean. Quote, the programs that have been frozen provide vital support to projects that strengthen media, transparency, and democracy, according to Clayton Wiemers, executive director of Reporters Without Borders USA, who claimed this in a statement. Quote, President Trump justified this order by charging without evidence that a so-called foreign aid industry is not aligned with U.S. interests. Globalists claim those impacted by the cuts are journalists countering Iranian and Russian propaganda. But taxpayers argue USAID, reportedly a shell organization for CIA messaging, spent taxpayer money that pushed a left-wing narrative. Quote, USAID, like the Endowment for Democracy, are well-documented CIA fronts that are designed to manipulate other countries' internal politics for the benefit of DC elites and nobody else in the U.S. Both agencies have brought destruction and can't die soon enough, according to independent journalist Glenn Greenwald. J. Michael Walker, author of Big Intel, How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains, said that USAID is not a front for the CIA, it's worse than that. Quote, USAID became its own unaccountable covert operations agency, he said. USAID ran covert ops without a presidential finding as required by law. So you can't really be doing covert operations unless the president has said, yeah, you can go ahead and do these covert operations. And that makes sense, but what they were doing seems like it got a little bit out of control. At some point, when you give people too much freedom and they run away with that freedom and they start doing things because they figure like, well, no one's really checking on me and I can kind of get away with this, that's what happens. The money gets spent, people do whatever they want to do, there's no oversight of it, and then you get into this situation where, yeah, they have to shut it all down. And from Reporters Without Borders, Trump's foreign aid freeze throws journalism around the world into chaos. Since the new American president announced the freeze of U.S. foreign aid, USAID has been in turmoil. Its website inaccessible. Its X account has been suspended. The agency's headquarters was closed, and employees told to stay home. Elon Musk, who Trump chose to lead the quasi-official Department of Government Efficiency, called USAID a criminal organization and said, we're shutting it down. Later that day, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced he was named acting director of the agency, suggesting its operations were being moved to the State Department. Almost immediately after the freeze went into effect, journalistic organizations around the world that receive American aid funding started reaching out to RSF, expressing confusion, chaos, and uncertainty. The affected organizations include large international NGOs that support independent media like the International Fund for Public Interest Media and smaller individual media outlets serving audiences living under repressive conditions in countries like Iran and Russia. USAID programs support independent media in more than 30 countries, but it's difficult to assess the full extent of the harm done to the global media. Many organizations are hesitant to draw attention for fear of risking long-term funding or coming under political attacks, or maybe political accountability for taking money to do propaganda. USAID was the main donor for Ukrainian media. In Ukraine, where 9 out of 10 outlets rely on subsidies and USAID is the primary donor, several local media have already announced the suspension of their activities and are searching for alternative solutions. The risk of this suspension is that it could open the door to other sources of funding that may seek to alter the editorial line and independence of these media. Quote, some media might be shut down or bought by businessmen or oligarchs. I think Russian money will enter the market, and government propaganda will, of course, intensify. According to Anna Babinet, CEO and co-founder of an investigative media outlet based in Kyiv. RSF has already witnessed the direct effects of such propaganda. A fabricated video, falsely branded with our organization's logo, claimed we welcome the suspension of USAID funding for Ukrainian media, a stance RSF has never endorsed. And this is not the first time this has happened. Beyond the decline in donor support in Ukraine, media outlets are also facing growing threats to their funding and economic models in other countries. Georgia's transparency of foreign influence law, modeled after Russia's legislation, has put numerous media organizations at risk. The Georgian Prime Minister welcomed the U.S. President's decision with approval. And that's because in Georgia, in that country, not the state, they created a transparency law that said, look, if you're going to fund media and opposition in the country, opposition to the local government, we need you to say who you're getting funded by. So if you're getting funded by the United States to fund opposition media and opposition activities in our country, we want the public to be aware of that. And the United States USAID people did not like that. Samantha Power was really against it. Georgia was pressured, and they said, no, we're not going to back down on this. We want at least our public to know if there's opposition to the current government, we want the public to know it's being funded from outside the country. The funding suspension is officially expected to last only 90 days, according to the U.S. government. However, some, like Katerina Abramova, communications director for leading exiled Russian media outlet Meduza, fear that the reviews of funding contracts could take much longer. Abramova is anticipating the risk that these funds may be permanently cut off. Quote, exiled media are even more in a fragile position than others, as we can't monetize our audience, and crowdfunding has its limits, especially when donating to Meduza is a crime in Russia, according to Abramova. By abruptly suspending American aid, the United States has made many media outlets and journalists vulnerable, dealing a significant blow to press freedom. For all the media outlets interviewed by RSF, the priority is to recover and urgently find alternative funding. If all this funding was so important to their journalistic propaganda efforts, why didn't they somehow reach out to the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, try to find out, are you going to continue this funding or not? Because without the support of the president, it doesn't really look like this is any kind of legitimate thing they should have been doing in the first place. And speaking of getting in trouble, from Variety, Donald Trump calls for 60 Minutes to be terminated amid lawsuit. President Donald Trump called on CBS to cancel its longest-running news magazine, 60 Minutes, the latest maneuver in a legal battle he started against the program last year. In a $10 billion lawsuit filed by Trump in federal court in the Northern District of Texas in November, Trump alleged 60 Minutes tried to mislead voters, which they really did do, by airing two different edits of remarks made in an interview with former Vice President Kamala Harris, then Trump's rival for the White House. CBS sought to have the case thrown out in a subsequent filing, which obviously did not work. Here's what Trump said, quote, CBS and 60 Minutes defrauded the public by doing something which has never to this extent been seen before. They 100% removed Kamala's horrible election-changing answers to questions and replaced them with completely different and far better answers taken from another part of the interview. This was election-changing stuff, election interference, and quite simply, election fraud at a level never seen before. CBS should lose its license, and the cheaters at 60 Minutes should all be thrown out, and this disreputable news show should be immediately terminated. With a new Democrat scandal that just arose with respect to USAID illegally paying large sums of money to Politico and other media outlets, the question must be asked, was CBS paid for committing this fraud? Many other questions to come. This will go down as the biggest broadcasting scandal in history. Trump does have a tendency to exaggerate, and he is being a little bit hyperbolic here, but with all the media outlets actually directly getting cash and support from the federal government through USAID and apparently through other federal agencies, we'll see more about that. It does make sense to ask the question. I guess he could ask Elon Musk to kind of search their databases. Did CBS get any kind of additional financial support, or was this just something they wanted to do because they wanted to help their chosen candidate win the election? CBS is part of Paramount. Paramount is trying to merge with another company, and they're going to need the approval of the Justice Department, and they're going to need the approval of the FCC. The bigger that Paramount gets, the more influence they have over the media market. So it does make sense to ask, what happened here exactly? Let us know the truth so we can evaluate your merger. And Trump has a lawsuit going. That has to be dealt with as well. If he's giving them the option to just cancel 60 Minutes, fire those people, it is a big deal, but at least they would be able to get on with their merger and not worry about the licensing for CBS. The way that Trump operates is he comes up with a very big ask and then he's generally willing to negotiate. I don't think he needs to have them cancel their CBS operating license under the FCC, but I wouldn't go up against this guy if I was somebody who has basically a video that shows they did make substantive changes to that interview and they didn't announce that they did. They said quite the opposite. Either way, if you're in the fake news business, Trump's not going to give you any cash. He's out to get the fake news, and that's why they're in a panic. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you. And if you want to support the channel and help me make even more videos, become a paid member of the channel today.